from God, it never comes to glorify man, but to glorify the giver. The first test of divine blessing is understanding its purpose. Many people mistake God's provision as a reward for their cleverness or strength, but heaven does not operate through pride. When God releases wealth into your life, it is not to make you greater than others, but to make you more useful to others. Money in the hands of a person who fears God becomes a tool for compassion, healing, and service. It becomes an instrument through which heavens will touch his earth. But in the hands of pride, that same money turns into a chain that binds the heart and blinds the soul. You see, money itself has no voice, yet it speaks loudly through the choices of those who hold it. Some use it to build altars to themselves. Others use it to build bridges for others. The difference lies in the understanding that divine provision carries divine purpose. When your wealth is born from prayer, from faithfulness, from walking in the narrow path of obedience, then that money does not belong to you alone. It belongs to the mission God has placed within your heart. That is why, when the blessing arrives, the first step is not to celebrate loudly, but to kneel quietly. For gratitude is more powerful than display, and humility keeps the door of blessing open. There are those who say, "I worked hard, I earned this." But who gave you the strength to work? Who sustained your breath while you dreamed of tomorrow? Who kept your mind stable when others lost theirs? It is not by human effort alone that wealth multiplies. It is by divine permission. God's money is not like the world's money. The world gives to inflate the ego, but God gives to expand the heart. When you understand this, you stop measuring your worth by the size of your account and start measuring it by the size of your obedience. True prosperity begins the moment you say, "Lord, this belongs to you. Teach me how to use it." Money, when used with wisdom, becomes a silent sermon. It preaches without words. It feeds the hungry, educates the child, shelters the weak, and supports the gospel. But when it is used foolishly, it destroys what faith has built. That is why spiritual maturity must precede material prosperity. God does not bless to destroy, He blesses to build. And when He gives, He watches, not to take it back, but to see how you handle what He placed in your hands. If you allow money to lead you, it will lead you away from peace. But if you lead money with prayer, it will follow you into purpose. There will be times when you wonder why God has given you more than you asked for. That is because He trusts you with His resources. The poor man who becomes generous, the humble servant who becomes a channel of blessing. These are God's treasures on earth. When that trust is broken through pride or greed, the blessing that was meant to lift becomes the very weight that pulls down. Remember, what comes from God must remain with God. Do not let His provision turn you away from His presence. Money is not evil. The love of it is. When it becomes your master, you forget your mission. But when it remains your servant, you walk in divine order. So when money comes from God, keep your heart soft and your motives clean. Let your hands work, but let your spirit worship. Do not announce your blessing. Live it quietly, let your fruit speak. The true sign of divine wealth is peace, not pride. And if your riches draw you closer to God instead of further from Him, then you have passed the test of prosperity. For money in the hands of the wise does not shine for attention. It shines for purpose. When blessings begin to flow, silence becomes a shield. There is a holy mystery in staying quiet when God lifts you, because not every ear around you can handle the sound of your breakthrough. When money comes from heaven, it carries a spiritual fragrance that can easily attract both admiration and jealousy. That is why wisdom whispers, "Be still." Keep your joy between you and the one who gave it. Not everything that shines must be shown, and not every victory must be voiced. When you speak too soon, you invite eyes that do not see with love and hearts that do not understand your journey. But when you remain silent, your peace remains untouched and your blessing grows in strength. There are people who lose what God gives them not because the blessing was weak, but because their mouths were too strong. They broadcast what was meant to be guarded. They shout what heaven asked them to steward quietly. Divine blessings are like seeds. They grow best in quiet soil. When you expose them too early, the wind of opinions and the heat of envy can dry them before they bear fruit. God sometimes gives us success in silence to teach us the discipline of stillness. He wants us to learn that what is sacred should never be treated as common. The more precious the gift, the more quietly it must be carried. Silence is not emptiness, it is strength under control. When you are quiet, you are not ignoring people. You are protecting what God is doing within you. There is a deep beauty in humility that speaks louder than any announcement. The world loves noise. Heaven works in whispers. God spoke to Elijah not in the wind or the earthquake, but in a still small voice. That is how divine things operate. Without drama, without noise, without need for applause. When your blessing comes, follow that same rhythm. Let your gratitude rise in prayer, not in public display. The quiet heart is the safest vault for heavenly treasure. Many fail the test of prosperity because they confuse testimony with exhibition. Testimony glorifies God, exhibition glorifies self. When you testify, the focus is on what God did. When you show off, the focus shifts to what you own. The difference is subtle but spiritually critical. God will not share His glory, and He withdraws where pride takes root. So when He blesses you, thank Him privately before speaking publicly. Let your fruits reveal His goodness before your lips declare it. In time, your life itself will become the testimony others need to see. There will be moments when people question your calmness, why you don't post your success, why you don't boast about your gain. But you know, the deeper the river, the quieter it flows. True prosperity does not need to shout, it simply moves with grace. Silence is the sign of maturity. Noise is the mark of insecurity. Those who know that their source is God do not compete. They do not compare, and they do not announce every blessing. They know that the same God who gave it can multiply it in secret. So keep quiet and stay wise. Let your silence be your protection and your humility be your crown. There is a time to speak But before that time comes, let your silence mature the seed of blessing. When you walk in quiet confidence, people will see God's favor without you saying a word. The peace that surrounds you will testify louder than any story. The wisdom that guides your hands will speak of divine partnership. Remember, noise attracts attention, silence attracts presence, and it is better to dwell in the presence of God than in the applause of men. When money comes from God, learn the language of quietness, because that is where His wisdom lives. Wisdom begins where obedience starts. The blessings of God are never random. They are built on a foundation of listening and following His voice. Many pray for prosperity, but few prepare their hearts for instruction. When money comes from heaven, it is not a reward for cleverness, but a response to obedience. God does not pour His treasures into hands that cannot be guided. He blesses those who walk according to His will, because He knows they will not be led astray by the gift. True wisdom is not found in the abundance of things, in the ability to hear and obey the giver. There are times when the voice of God leads you to decisions that seem illogical to the world. Give when you feel like keeping, serve when you could be sleeping, sow when you need to save. Yet, obedience in such moments becomes the soil where miracles grow. Those who are wise understand that God's ways are higher than their own. They do not argue with divine direction, they trust it. When you obey in small things, God can trust you with greater things. Every instruction you follow becomes a doorway to deeper wisdom. The more you listen, the clearer His guidance becomes, and the clearer His guidance, the safer your blessings remain. Wisdom is not shouting from the mountaintop, it is whispering in the heart. It comes quietly, gently, and only to those who make room for it. In a world full of noise, people mistake information for wisdom and ambition for calling. But divine wisdom is not found in noise. It is found in stillness, in the quiet surrender that says, "Lord, not my will, but yours." When you live that way, money can never rule you. You handle it with reverence, knowing it came through the hands of grace. Obedience teaches you restraint, and restraint preserves your peace. Without obedience, wealth becomes a storm. With obedience, it becomes a steady river of blessing. The wise man does not ask, "How much can I get?" but rather, "How can I use what I have for God's purpose?" He knows that wisdom governs wealth, not the other way around. There are many who have riches but no rest, luxury but no light, abundance but no alignment. What they lack is obedience. For when God gives instruction, it is not to limit you, but to protect you from destruction. Disobedience can make blessings short-lived, but obedience secures them for generations. Every time you obey, you anchor your prosperity to divine order. Even in seasons of plenty, the wise heart continues to listen. Success can be louder than failure, and in its noise, many stop hearing God. They assume their achievements are proof of their wisdom, but often they are merely tests of their humility. God watches how you handle His blessings when your prayers have been answered. Will you still listen when you no longer need to ask? Will you still follow when the road looks clear? Obedience is not a single act, it is a lifestyle. Wisdom grows through continual surrender, and that surrender keeps you grounded when wealth tries to lift you too high. So when money comes, don't just thank God for the provision. Thank Him for the instruction that brought it. Remember that divine wealth is sustained not by intelligence, but by obedience. If you stay teachable, God will keep you trustworthy. If you remain humble, He will keep increasing your wisdom. For obedience opens the door to blessing, and wisdom keeps it open. The moment you stop listening, the flow begins to fade. Stay quiet enough to hear His voice and wise enough to follow it. In that balance lies the secret of lasting prosperity, because when God speaks and you obey, no blessing can be lost. Prosperity is not the absence of struggle, it is the presence of character in abundance. Poverty tests patience, but prosperity tests the soul. When money begins to flow and life becomes comfortable, a new kind of challenge appears, one that hides behind ease. It is easy to pray when you are in need, but will you still kneel when you are full? Many people ask God for blessings, yet few are prepared for the weight that comes with them. Wealth is light in the beginning, it grows heavier if the heart is not humble. When God prospers a person, He also watches to see if that heart remains faithful or begins to drift. The true measure of success is not how much you have, but how much of you still belongs to God after you have it. When you walk through poverty, you learn dependence. When you walk through prosperity, you learn discipline. The first season teaches you to ask, the second teaches you to guard. Prosperity exposes motives. What was once hidden in need becomes visible in abundance. Some people appear humble in lack only because they had no other choice. But when blessing arrives, their true nature surfaces. That is why God sometimes delays increase. He is preparing the heart before filling the hands. A man who gains wealth without inner strength loses both sooner or later. But the one who allows prosperity to shape his character becomes a vessel fit for greater purpose. When money comes from God, it carries responsibility. It calls for stewardship, not indulgence. The wise do not see riches as freedom to do anything. They see them as freedom to do the right thing. Prosperity becomes dangerous when it disconnects you from gratitude. The moment you forget who the source is, the blessing begins to lose its purity. God does not mind you having wealth, He minds wealth having you. The soul that forgets humility starts serving gold instead of God. And once money becomes your master, peace becomes your prisoner. To remain pure in prosperity, one must walk carefully, prayerfully, and quietly. The same humility that opened the door to blessing must remain guarding it. Every increase must be followed by deeper surrender. Say to yourself, "This is not mine. I am only a caretaker." That mindset keeps the heart from corruption. When you see wealth as a tool, not a trophy, you remain anchored in purpose. Prosperity then becomes a continuation of service, not a conclusion of struggle. It transforms your hands into instruments of compassion rather than symbols of pride. Sometimes God allows prosperity to test whether love still leads your choices. When you have enough to give, will you share? When you have the power to command, will you still serve? When you can take credit, will you still give glory? Every blessing carries these silent questions, and your answers reveal the depth of your wisdom. Prosperity is a mirror. It reflects who you have truly become. If your heart remains tender, if your spirit remains teachable, then wealth will never separate you from the presence of God. But if pride enters quietly, destruction soon follows loudly. So when prosperity comes, don't fear it. But don't take it lightly either. Treat it as both an honor and a test. Let gratitude guide your spending, humility shape your speech, and prayer govern your plans. The higher God lifts you, the lower you must bow in worship. For when your soul remains humble, your success will remain holy. Remember, it is not how much money you hold that defines your blessing. It is how well you hold your heart while holding it. When prosperity meets purity, heaven smiles, and that smile is worth more than all the riches on earth. When God blesses a person with wealth, He does it with purpose in mind. Divine provision is never meant for personal display. It is meant for divine assignment. Money that comes from God carries a mission stamped on it. It comes not to enlarge your name, but to expand His kingdom through your obedience. The moment you see wealth as yours alone, you begin to shrink the purpose for which it was given. But when you see it as a sacred trust, every coin becomes a seed and every act of generosity becomes a sermon. The reason many lose divine blessings is not because God withdraws them, but because they misuse them. They forget that purpose must always come before pleasure. God does not give simply to make you comfortable. He gives to make you capable of blessing others. When your hands are open to share, heaven keeps them filled. The river that flows outward never runs dry, but the one that hoards becomes stagnant. The purpose of divine wealth is movement, to let it flow where God leads. A wise person understands that prosperity is partnership. You become a co-worker with heaven, entrusted to carry out assignments that only resources can accomplish. Feeding the hungry, helping the poor, supporting the gospel. These are not options, they are responsibilities that come with divine provision. When God gives you more, He is trusting you to do more. True wealth is not measured by what you own, but by what you release. It is not the size of your bank account that reveals your blessing, but the reach of your generosity. The rich man who forgets his calling becomes poor in spirit, but the one who shares his wealth becomes rich in peace. When God blesses you, it is never just about you. Somewhere, someone's prayer is connected to your provision. Someone's need is waiting for your obedience. That is how heaven's economy works. God answers through people. And when you become that answer, you experience the deepest joy money can bring. You must understand that the money that comes from God is not ordinary currency, it is sacred trust. It must be handled with reverence and directed by wisdom. Before every decision, ask, Lord, what is the purpose of this blessing? That question keeps your heart aligned with His will. The moment you treat divine money like worldly money, using it for pride or comparison, it begins to lose its anointing. But when you spend it prayerfully, even small acts become eternal investments. The poor you feed, the church you support, the family you lift, all become testimonies that outlive your name. There will be seasons when God tests your understanding of purpose. He may ask you to give away what you treasure most, not to reduce you, but to refine you. He wants to see whether your love is for the gift or the giver. Each time you choose obedience over comfort, you open the door for greater blessing, for God can only multiply what you release. The seed in your hand does nothing until it leaves your hand, and once you plant it in purpose, heaven begins to water it with increase. That is why wise believers never fear generosity. They know that giving never empties, it only expands. So when God's money comes into your life, remember its reason. You were not chosen to boast but to build, not to collect but to contribute. Wealth given without purpose fades, but wealth used for God's work multiplies beyond measure. Let your life become a channel where divine provision meets human need. If you live that way, your blessings will never end, because heaven always refills what it can trust to flow. Money with purpose becomes ministry, and ministry born of gratitude becomes worship. When you use what God gives to reflect His heart, then your prosperity becomes your greatest prayer. Every blessing from God carries a rhythm. Receive with gratitude, manage with wisdom, and return with faithfulness. Gratitude keeps the heart humble, stewardship keeps the blessing alive. When God releases money into your hands, He is not only giving you a resource, but testing your response. Will you recognize the giver behind the gift, or will the gift become your distraction? Gratitude is the anchor that keeps the soul from drifting when success begins to sail. It reminds you that everything you have is borrowed from grace. A thankful heart cannot become proud because it never forgets where the blessing began. Many people thank God when they receive something new. Few remain thankful while managing what they already have. Gratitude is not a moment. It is a mindset. It shapes how you handle every opportunity, every possession, every season. When you are grateful, even small blessings feel abundant. When you are ungrateful, even abundance feels small. The wise never let their gratitude fade after the first prayer of thanks. They keep worship alive in their handling of what God has given. Every decision becomes an act of appreciation. Every act of generosity becomes a continuation of praise. Stewardship, on the other hand, is the discipline that protects what gratitude begins. It means managing wealth with responsibility, not emotion. The steward does not ask, "What do I want to do with this?" but, "What does God want me to do with this?" Money that comes from God must remain under His direction. When you use divine provision for divine purpose, you invite more of heaven's trust. God never increases where wisdom is absent, but He multiplies where faithfulness is proven. The one who is faithful with little will always be trusted with more. Not because of the amount, because of the attitude. Stewardship also means living within boundaries. Not every open door is meant to be entered, and not every opportunity is meant to be seized. Some blessings are preserved through restraint. The world teaches to spend to be seen. but the Spirit teaches to save to be strong. Wisdom is not in how much you give away or how much you keep, but in how obediently you manage what God assigns. The moment you let greed or fear guide your choices, the peace that came with the blessing begins to fade. But when gratitude and stewardship walk together, wealth becomes peaceful, not painful. There is also a spiritual law in motion. What you handle well multiplies. Gratitude attracts favor. Good stewardship invites increase. When heaven sees that you honor every coin as a gift from God, more is entrusted to you. The blessed life is not about chasing more, it is about managing well. When you spend, you should think like a servant, not like an owner. When you give, do it as one who understands the joy of being used by God. In that quiet partnership, increase becomes natural. Heaven never stops investing in hearts that remain thankful and wise. In the end, money is not the measure. Faithfulness is. God is not impressed by how much you earn, by how much you honor Him with what you have. Gratitude sanctifies your prosperity. Stewardship sustains it. The combination of the two turns temporary wealth into eternal impact. So when blessings fill your life, keep your heart bowed in thanks, your hands steady in management, and your spirit open to divine guidance. If you remain faithful in the little, God will trust you with much. For the secret to lasting prosperity lies not in gaining more, in proving you can handle what you already have with quiet gratitude and wise stewardship. That is when heaven says, "Well done, faithful servant," and the flow of blessing never ends.